All right, I think we've got a quorum, so we will now call the meeting of the Waco MPO Policy Board of January 18, 2024 to order at, I've got 1:32 p.m. MPO staff, has this meeting been posted?
Yes.
And are there any councils or governmental bodies that need to be called into session? I don't see any fellow City of Waco council members here yet. Maybe we'll do that mid-meeting. All right, we provide an opportunity for the public to address the MPO Policy Board on any agenda item. If you're wanting to speak, please complete a speaker's registration card with MPO staff. Speakers will be allotted one presentation at the beginning of the agenda for each agenda item the speaker wishes to address. Please note that each action item will have a separate public hearing later in the agenda. Speakers have the option of addressing the board at either time, but you will only be allowed one opportunity to address the board per agenda item. For items not on today's agenda, there's a separate hearing of visitors at the end of the meeting. MPO staff, do we have any registered speakers today? No. All right. There are no registered speakers, so we'll move to agenda item 3 and consider approval of the minutes of the October 19th, 2023 MPO Policy Board meeting. Was that our last meeting, October 19th? Yeah. November 16th. Yeah. Sorry about that. November 16th meeting. I believe those minutes were provided. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, they will stand approved as presented. Right. Okay, we will all right, we've got agenda item number 4 now. And let's see if this is all from this. Yeah, sorry about that. Review, discussion, and action regarding project funding strategies for immediate short-term projects. We have our staff presentation by Dr. Come on.
We're inviting Victor to come and explain quite a bit of information here, since we want to talk about some of the issues that South Waco District is getting ready for the next UTP.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we are in the middle of forming our FY25 UTP. Right now, we're in 24 UTP, which is shown up here on the board right here. So before I kind of go into the problem that we have of having some funds that we need to get allocated, kind of walk you through what our UTP is. It's a Unified Transportation Plan. It's a 10-year plan that's given to us by the TPP division in Austin. As you can see, the FY24 UTP here covers FY24 through 2033. The 25 UTP is going to cover 2025 through 2034. So what they do is they break down, a yearly allocation of Cat 2 funding. That's the MPO corridor funding that this MPO gets. As you can see, there's 28 million in 2024, 34 and 25, so on and so forth, as it breaks down all the way through 2033. So these numbers are based on the cash forecast out of Austin and are subject to change. But as you can tell, they kind of front loaded the first years because they're wanting to get a lot of this cash out on the streets. So go to the next slide, please. So what we're running into right now is we're having to program funds for the 25 UTP. And as it stands right now, this MPO has an estimated $48 million worth of unallocated Cat 2 funds. 23 that we know of for sure is due to us having to back off some Cat 2 funds from the I-35 4C project because of STIP constraint, which we went back and filled in with Cat 4. And then we're estimating that this MPO will probably get another 20 to 25 million of Cat 2 funds with the new UTP that's coming out. So TPP wants us to program 100% of these funds. So we're estimating 48, it could be 58, it could be 38. We don't know yet because that second number, the 25 million, is not going to be known until the 31st. But they have a deadline on us to allocate those funds in the UTP before this policy board's going to meet again. So we've come up with a couple scenarios that I'm going to walk through and kind of show what we think we could do and kind of get some input from you guys on what we ought to. So next slide, please. So here's some of the consequences if we don't allocate the funds. They could be put on hold for other districts to use. We're not going to lose them, but it could tie them up and we're not be able to use them when we want to. And then as far as considerations, what we're looking to do here is allocate these funds to certain projects, but we're still going to have time to come back into the process before this UTP comes into effect. It won't come into effect until August 31st. So September 1st is when it starts. Next slide, please. Before we go into the different scenarios, I just want to kind of go through what the fully funded projects we have out there and let y'all know that none of these projects are going to be impacted by anything that we choose to do today. So number one, we have I-35 4C. Everybody knows about that one. And then next one is the US 84 ramp reversal project from 1695 to State Highway 6. I don't know if you guys have seen the schematic that we have showing a full-blown corridor study. That doesn't fund that, but what we do have funded is the frontage roads and the ramps and the intersections, the main lanes, the direct connects, the bridges at Highway 6. None of that is funded, but we do have enough to fund a breakout project to get the ramp reversal done. Next up is the State Highway 6 widening project from FM 185 to McLaughlin Road. That takes Highway 6 to a 5-lane section in that brief period between 185 and where the 4-lane divided next down. And then finally, the State Spur 298 Franklin and New Road. US 84 to Valley Mills Drive, that's the project there that's going to put the overpass at New Road. That's still fully funded also. So none of these projects will be impacted. They will say they will remain fully funded.
And can you explain to us the difference between fully funded and allocated?
Allocation is a dollar amount that TPP division TxDOT allocates to the MPO to do as they wish. I think 2033, we had 28 million. That's an allocation from TPP to the MPO. Program is when we actually take those allocated funds and program them to a specific project. So these projects are all programmed from that allocation.
Okay. Okay.
Next slide, please. So here's the two funding strategies that we talked about at the TAC. We have two partially funded projects out there right now. The first one is State Highway 6 Twin Bridges. That's a $60 million project. It's going to reconstruct and widen the two bridges and take them to a 6-lane configuration to allow for future Highway 6 expansion. We currently have $30 million of Cat 6, which is bridge division replacement funds. And we have $4 million of Cat 4, which is district discretionary statewide connectivity funds. So we have a funding gap of $26 million. The other project that we presented on this a few months ago is the Northeast Loop 340. It's a $160 million construction estimate for the ultimate section. That's the main lanes, the frontage roads, overpasses, and ramps. It's basically a access controlled full freeway facility. We did end up getting 51.9 million of Cat 2 on there that would fund the frontage roads only at the grade level. It wouldn't have the main lanes and the ramps. That would be a separate project that would have to come back later. So we have a $108 million funding gap to get that one fully funded. And we have 48 million to work with. So the two options were to either fully fund Highway 6 and put the remainder on 340, or put the whole amount on 340 and basically still have two partially funded projects. In TAC, we talked about that, and basically because of the age of infrastructure and having a full project, we had recommended doing the State Highway 6.
Are you ready for questions?
Yes.
So if we did that, so if we got roughly 48, so 26 goes, there's still some left over that you would allocate partially to 340. How does the rest of the 340? So there still would be another 80 million or so required for the rest.
Correct.
So how would that
We would keep
wait
that.
for Cat 2 funding in future years?
Yes. And we're also have applied for a grant.
So if that came through, we could.
Right. And based on project readiness, we could let the twin bridges really fast. The 340, we're still 2 or 3 years out for development, right of way acquisition, utility relocation.
And that's for the smaller version or the full version, because the smaller version is the front road, which are out where that right away would be required. And then what about earlier on, like you said, work funding, you mentioned 84, and what is funded is only the ramp reversal. Was there any discussion about some of the money going towards more of that project, or is it so far out of development?
It's way.
Real quick, I need to call our Waco City Council into session here as well today, as we've got wonderful council members here in the meeting. But we may now continue. Respected and esteemed beloved colleagues.
340 was going to be phased all all along, I mean, when y'all presented it to us last year, it was to be phased anyway, correct?
Yes, sir.
That was my understanding.
It's gonna be phased. If we get the grant, then we can do it all as one project.
You were rather optimistic about the funding.
It's still up in the air. We haven't heard back yet. We could hear back as soon as the end of this month, which should be coming back.
So we're at a juncture right now where if we don't allocate, then is it 25 or 28 may be used for outside of our region. If we do allocate and go with the TAC recommendation, that's the Twin Bridges project.
The Twin Bridges would get whole and the remainder would get put on the 340 project. So we'd have 100% of our allocation program projects.
Okay.
And it's not set in stone necessarily. The Twin Bridges may be because we're so close to letting those will probably let next year.
Victor, is there any possibility of a federal grant for the Twin Bridges? I mean, we've got the accident history, it's functionally obsolete. Have you looked at that at all?
I have not, no. I did ask our federal affairs liaison about that. She said it might be a good candidate project, but I haven't heard anything back. from her yet.
The call just came out for it, for the federal funding bridge project.
We may be kicking that up and trying for that also then.
It's a pretty short time frame. But based on what we looked at for Spiegelville, it seems like you would meet the requirements.
Any other questions or discussion?
So the TAC recommended the Highway 6 Twin Bridges because in essence, we could get a project going, and having something going with funding that's available seemed to make more sense than throwing it into the Loop 340, and then you still have two projects that are not moving forward. Victor, maybe, I don't know if you could comment on if the policy board decides to go with the TAC recommendation and fully fund Twin Bridge project, if then the Twin Bridge project could be, try to get a grant. If that grant money was awarded, is that amount of money set in stone for the Twin Bridges, or can it then be reallocated to
I was
340?
gonna ask if we could do a motion that was conditional.
Yeah, absolutely. We could reallocate it. We'd rather spend the grant money first before we spend any of this category.
So at this point in time for today, for instance, the most important part is that district needs to prepare for the next UTP. In order for them to prepare for the next UTP, we have to program these, we have to allocate these money to specific projects. We will still have until August to make any changes that we might want to make. And also even after that, at least for until we program it fully into the tip and letting new funding comes through, we can always deallocate and put it on the.
So we might not even need a conditional motion. We just say we want today and it could be revised later as funding conditions change.
And this isn't an action. Would you consider this an action item as directed action, or is it kind of the mind of the meeting is essentially what we're seeking?
Today, the policy board will direct the staff to program this into the May revision of the tip.
Okay. So what we've got is the tax, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, you mentioned for the Twin Bridges becomes priority because of the Highway 6 expansion project. So where is that? If Highway 6 is going to expand, what's the timeline on that?
That would be a long range timeline on Highway 6. We are procuring a contract right now to start schematic, looking at that, studying that. But even if we were to have that 100% funded and start hitting the ground now, you're still 6 to 8 years out before we would be turning dirt up there. So
It looks like county, I mean, to me, the Loop 340 deal would be more beneficial to people within the county to relieve of I-35 plus opened up better access to people in Robertson all the way back around.
but let me clarify too a little bit. Highway 6 is in the timeline of things, like I said, development, we have our environmental done, our Corps of Engineer coordination is done. Everything's complete, design's complete. We just have to get it funded and it's ready to go. The 340, no matter which way we go, whether it's ultimate or breakout, 4-lane, we're still 27, 28 would be the earliest we could deliver that project. So kind of what I'm getting at too is if we do fund Highway 6, we have a whole project, like Zane was saying, we still have a whole project on 340. It's just not going to be the big everything. It's going to be just the frontage roads and getting 4 lanes out there. But if we don't fund the twin bridges, then yeah, I guess we could keep chasing, trying to get the ultimate funding for 340, but regardless, we could still deliver a project for 340. I delivered both of these projects, so just something to keep in mind.
So I mean, we could do 26 on Twin Bridges and then
22 plus or minus.
22 for the Loop 340.
Right, and as we keep going through these UTP cycles, like I said, we can't deliver 340 at the earliest till 27, 28. We've got more cycles and more money's going to be coming through with these UTPs. This one, I don't know where it's all going to land at, but I've been told there's probably going to be an additional $3 billion in this FY25 UTP, somewhere around there. Now, where it gets split up on categories, that we won't know that until our preliminary targets come out at the end of this month.
If I could add a couple of things. The State Highway 6 Twin Bridges, we have concern about the bridges, like we've heard, they're obsolete, functionally obsolete. That doesn't mean they're unsafe, they're functionally obsolete. We attempted a pretty large repair project about 5 or 6 years ago. One of the reasons why we had to cut it short, we didn't complete the whole project, we cut it short because of some of the operational issues of having head-to-head traffic on one bridge. And for 3 hours, the backups were tremendous. If we ever have any kind of failure, which we don't expect, or we had a traffic incident here, that operational issues on 340, they really don't exist except for minor. Sometimes if the interstate was closed during construction, you get some backups out there. Short term, we have operational concerns with twin bridges. So getting that out of the way. Now, the other thing, on our mall-to-mall project right now, we've widened all those bridges to accept the 6-lane State Highway 6. Twin bridges is not included in our schematic because we know we're going to get it delivered. It's just a matter of shuffling the next couple of years. So getting started on it, getting it done, and getting it out of the way, and kind of grease the skids, if you will, for additional State Highway 6. But we'd be ready to go with very little structure on the State Highway 6.
Where does the 84 Highway 6 interchange fall in all this?
So that's actually part of the schematic that we're working on right now. There's a schematic from 1695 here in the States that goes all the way to Lake Area Drive.
So that's the 84, 1695.
It's a corridor schematic, includes all of that stuff, including the direct connects from 84 to 6. Like I was saying, that project is about a $230 million project. We can't afford it all at once, but the money we do have on it right now can at least get the ramp reversals and the frontage roads fixed within that stretch. We'd have to come back later.
And I'm just thinking where traffic is at right now. And there's, it's not good there. I mean, it could be worse, but I'm sure that it's the morning into the evening, it's quite bad.
Right. I do think once the multiple jobs complete, a lot of that should share out. So.
This isn't a golden rule, but if we get projects under construction, it's better than having the money sitting there allocated and not working, because we know we're going to get backfilled in things. So finding ways to that's one of the big, my biggest headaches right now is finding ways to move projects up, not just in category 2, we've got 11 categories of money that we deal with, but moving them up so that we can get them under construction. Get them moving so that they're done, they're behind us, and then we move on, to the future 10-year TP. So the Highway 6 twin bridges, one of the, like I said, one of the issues we had last time was when we had abandoned the previous repair project. One of the issues was the massive traffic tie-ups from the towers. We designed this project, basically 2/3 of the bridge can be built underneath the existing bridges. Minimize the time we put traffic head to head on one side, so that we can build a superstructure of the other bridge and then swap traffic. So it would be, we've actually built that into the design so that we can build it from the bottom up without taking one bridge out of service, which would alleviate the traffic issues.
Any other thoughts, reflections before we, I guess, staff is seeking kind of a yay or nay on the allocation of these unallocated funds based on the TAC recommendation for the Highway 6 project. Is that well stated?
Yes.
I guess we'll start with yays and then go to nays. Yays? Yay? Any nays? Is that the, all right. Sounds good.
Do we want to put anything about the remaining 22 million?
Well, I think that was.
So so what we'll end up doing is that we'll write this as a TIP amendment, and we will allocate that 26 million to Twin Bridges, and then we'll allocate the remaining to the Loop 340 and in the new TIP, and then this will come for your approval again in later part of the year.
If anything changes along the way with grants or whatnot.
Yes,
There'll be updates and votes.
yes. So this will come back to you for your approval as part of the new TIP.
Okay.
Right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Like there's a little thing about the grant, there'll be a timeline on how long that we can expect. I don't know what it is. That'll put us in, if we get that grant, it could be substantial amount of money. That would have us go straight the money out of all the can to deliver that project within the deadline.
Anyway, get stuff going.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move to item number 5, consideration and action regarding approval of resolution 2024-1, adoption of amendment 5 to connections 2045, the Waco Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the MTP. Presentation from Dr. Kumar.
So there are in our 2045 MTP, we have to make this particular amendment. The thing that we wanted to bring to attention is that this is the image that we're going to be using about everything that MPO does. The most important part of the MTP is to provide direction to what all the where we are going. And so let's go to the next slide. And so in today's amendment for your consideration are that we are revising the cost estimates for US 84 project, the overall project. And it was $214.3 million. It is being revised down to 205 and from 223 for the total project cost to 214. And so our MTP needs to reflect that in order for it to be approved in the TIP, because these numbers have to match. We're also allocating FTA's 5339 formula program funds for Waco Transit. And we are projecting the 5-year allocations for the period, and we are bringing that into the MTP as well. And moving forward, until now, this will be the first time we'll be programming 5339A funds, which is the formula fund that FTA allocates for all public transit agencies for their bus and bus facilities. So for this one, we started you had given us the authorization to go ahead with the public comment period. So we did that until yesterday, January 17th. We have the public information meetings. Can you move to the next slide, please? January 8th at 12 noon and 5:30 p.m. We did not receive any formal comment. And the technical advisory committee reviewed it at January 4th meeting and recommended adoption of this amendment. And for today, we have a public hearing and we're expecting a policy board action on it.
All right, we will open the public hearing at 1:57 p.m. Are there any registered speakers here on this to address the board? No. Hearing none, we will close the public hearing at 1:58. Any questions or discussion on this? Clarification on any of these items in the amendment. We'll move on to action. Do we have a motion to approve this resolution 2024-1? Councilmember Bearfield, move for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a second. Commissioner Jones, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, nay. All right, the ayes have it. Motion passes unanimously. So now we will move on to item number 6, consideration and action regarding approval of resolution 2024-2, adoption of amendment 2 to the 2023 to 2026 Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. Dr. Kumar.
So, so in this case, the MTP provides the direction for everything we do, and TIP is what we like to call it. That's where rubber meets the road. Without it, nothing really moves forward. And so we're making another amendment. This is probably the last amendment for this particular TIP. After this, we'll have the new TIP for your consideration. So in this case, the reason why we do this is because all the projects that are ready to go, for which we have funding available, we like to program them as part of the TIP. And in today's, for today, what you're considering are several items. One is that recently TxDOT made this decision for funding some of the transportation alternative projects, and those were from 3 cities, cities of Mart, City of Waco, and City of Woodway for bike and pedestrian projects. So we would like to program them into the current TIP. We're also programming, City of Waco is going to be contributing $1.9 million as a part of project enhancement, as part of the I-35C project. We're also taking what you just gave us the directive action on category 2 allocation. We will program that into the TIP, as well as we're programming the 5339A funds for Waco Transit into the TIP. So these are all fairly routine work we do each year. So that's what the amendment for this one is. Next slide, please. These are the TA awards, which we always get very excited about when we receive them. This is the one in City of Mart. It's a neighborhood connector project, connects the downtown area with adjacent neighborhood schools and the community center. The next project is the Carver neighborhood project, which gives us a much better connectivity between MKT trails and to the riverfront in City of Waco. And the third project is Woodway Elementary safety improvement around the Woodway Elementary School in City of Woodway. The public transit funds, next slide, please. Public transit 5339A. For some of you, this may be slightly new. This is a formula fund that Waco Transit receives each year. And until recently, it was programmed directly by TxDOT, but now MPO is going to start programming them. And so what we're doing at this point in time is that we have funds from FY 2021 and 2022. We'll take them, treat them as carryover funds into FY 22. And then we are programming that into the TIP. FY 2024 allocations have not been met. When they have, once these allocations are made, then we take them and we put them in the new TIP. And so for today, after the public hearing, we are requesting you to approve this resolution to make these amendments to the 2023-2026 TIP.
All right, we'll open the public hearing at 2:01 in the PM. Do we have any registered speakers or anyone here to speak on this?
No.
All right, we will close the public hearing at the same time. And any questions or discussion on this matter before we take it up? Do we have a motion to approve resolution 2024-2? To approve. Was that Councilmember Ewing?
Second.
And second from Mr. Bell. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. All right, it is unanimously. And we will move on to update and discussion from staff regarding public engagement related to proposed PPP and Dr. Kumar.
So a public participation plan is what outlines how we engage with the community in our discussion on any of the decisions that policy board makes regarding allocation of funds, or for that matter, every decision policy board makes, it typically has a public participation component to it, which is outlined in our public participation plan. We are proposing to make a few revisions, and the revisions are, so the first one is that we want to clarify what the public hearing process is, primarily because we already do the public hearing the way we do, but our program actually does not reflect it as the way we perform them, which is that in every meeting we have public hearing at the beginning, we have public hearing for each of the action items, then we have a public hearing at the end. Our PPP needs to reflect that. So that's the first item. Along with that, one of the changes that we're making is that we're introducing a new way of making changes into all of our planning and programming documents, calling it administrative modification, and how we implement it. In a moment, I'll go over what that is. There are a few other items, quick housekeeping items. Section 4.1 tells what time Public Policy Board and ATTAC meets. Since we changed the time to 1:30, we have to reflect it into our public participation plan. Similarly, we are clarifying what the public hearing opportunities are and the participation. And one more item before I get to administrative amendment. Is that we in our PPP document, we do not specify when we mean working days, when we mean weekday, and so calendar days. So we want to make sure that whoever it means calendar day, it says calendar day, or it means working days, it says working days. The most important change we are making in our PPP is we're introducing a new category of action called administrative modification. What it means is that right now there are two types of action allowed. One is that the policy board takes an action for making some changes, which automatically triggers a public comment period. And after that, we bring it to you in a 3-step process. We inform you first, then we seek directive action, and then we do the public comment, then we bring it for you for formal action. What we would like to do is for some of the routine matters, we want to introduce a new set of step called administrative modification. What administrative modification does is that we present the changes that we would like to make to you. You give us the approval of doing it or not doing it. If you give us the approval, then at the time it is appropriate for us to make those changes in the eSTIP portal. When STIP revision happens, we'll call it administrative modification. It's not a full-blown action, because what it means is that we're not changing anything other than moving some of the categorical funds around. And typically what it ends up looking like as the new estimates come along, for instance, these numbers may change a little bit. It is important for federal approval process that our numbers in the TIP match exactly what is in statewide TIP, and it matches accurately with all the planning documents that we have. And so that's what the administrative modification is. So we'll bring to your attention first once you approve it. And once you give us a go ahead, then the staff, when the eSTIP typically happens 4 times a year, it opens up for quarterly revision. If we can make the changes through administrative modification, we would like to do that. And so that's the new step we are adding into our public participation plan. In this case also, you had given us the authorization to go ahead with the public comment period, which began on December 26th. It will continue on till February 9th. And so for today, we really wanted to give you more of an update on this because this will be presented to you as a formal action item at the next meeting once the public comment period is over. But it's been a while since we met in November, and so after that we started the public comment process. We wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. It will come to you as a formal action item during the February meeting.
Are you hopeful that we will receive some public participation about our public participation?
I seriously hope so, but I know this is this often does not happen. But yes, it's really important that that we all understand what these processes are.
That's right.
Yes. And so we presented to you as a directive action item to sort of carry on with the public solicitation of public comment period until February.
So any questions or concerns regarding these proposals and this process? Okay. We Move on to review, discussion, and action regarding a recommendation from the Waco MPO Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, to begin public engagement or solicit public comments concerning proposed annual performance targets. Dr. Kumar.
So as part of our planning process, move to the next. So what our planning process, sort of begins with strategic planning, but at the bottom you see the systems operations. Those are the performance measures we are supposed to be not only presenting on and add in our annual report, but what we also do is that adopt some targets for the current year. So one of the important ones relates to safety. And in today's meeting, what we are requesting you to give us the go-ahead to present these targets for public comment period. And again, we will bring it to you for formal action at the next meeting in February. Next slide, please. And so in this particular case, for the safety related, we do safety improvements that needs to prioritize where the funds are allocated, and all the 5 items that we typically consider are total number of fatalities per 100 million vehicle mile traveled, number of serious injuries per 100 million mile traveled, as well as number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Those are basically bike pedestrian injuries and fatalities that we typically adopt. We reassess and do these targets each year in January and February. And so let's move to the next slide. Until now, we have been, so the way this process works is TxDOT sets the statewide targets and sends it to every MPO. Then MPO sort of prorates it for their respective planning area and adopts these targets. TxDOT has adopted a Road to Zero commitment. And with that, the expectation is that over the next 25 to 30 years, we expect zero fatality, which we sort of know that's not realistic. We are probably not going to get to zero fatality anytime soon. However, one of the things that we wanted to bring quite importantly is that one of the very important concerns we do have is that our fatality rates are not declining. 2020 during the pandemic year was the year when we were already beginning to witness significantly higher rates of fatality as well as serious injuries. For a while, we thought that 2020 must have been a strange year, but it turns out that it really wasn't. And in fact, 2021 and 2022 were also quite deadly, not only for state of Texas, nationally, it has been a major concern. And state of Texas has higher fatality and serious injury rates than rest of the country. And in McLennan County, at least for the year 2020, 2021 and 2022, we were in fact worse than the state average as well. Fortunately, the good news is that for the current year 2023, we are doing better than the state average. And so in a moment, I'll talk about some of these numbers. But what I wanted to, among the staff, one of the things that we have been trying to figure out, it's one thing to adopt a target. It's a completely different thing to figure out what exactly are we going to be doing about it and how do we know that we are making actually any progress. So when we look at these numbers, fatalities are often not necessarily some very systematic, you can predict exactly the number of fatalities we're going to have, because quite often we get to it better from data on near misses, for instance, because some of the near misses which actually become accidents may turn deadly. Some of the near misses, we don't even notice that they actually happened and we assume that everything was safe, but that's not necessarily true. But we are doing quite a bit of work over the last 3 years. For instance, we applied and received funding for 2 rounds of SS4A, and we're engaged in developing the comprehensive safety action plan now. But let's look through some of our numbers, which should, let's go to the next table. So this is the statewide target. And one of the things you would notice is that 2024, the statewide target is 3,046. What is depressing about these numbers is that we are setting our target that for the year 2024, we are okay with 3,046 fatalities. And that should not be okay at all by any means. I mean, that's a lot of people dying on our roadway. In terms of serious injuries statewide, it's 18,242 for 2024 target. And one of the things you would notice is that that's what is highlighted in the bold letters, is that under the new bipartisan infrastructure law, what was happening was that several state DOTs and MPOs were adopting targets that were much more realistic, but quite often they meant that they were adopting targets that were worse than the previous year. So under the new infrastructure bill, they made it mandatory that you can't adopt a target that's worse than last year. It has to be at the minimum better than last year. And that's what you're noticing, that 2024 target was 18,242. But that number is actually, we really needed it to be more like 17,062. That's where the targets are. For McLennan County, when we translated what we were talking about, that look at 2020, we had 34 fatalities, went up to 36 in 21 and 41 fatalities in 2021. It did decline to 30, and 2024 target is 29, which again is simply prorated average for total number of miles and the size of McLennan County based on that.
Next slide on the.
Next slide.
Is there any sense of this, Dr. Kumar, whether our I-35 expansion and construction had anything to do with some of the spikes since 2020 in our fatality? I know it dropped in 2023, so I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, with I-35, no, because I-35, given the speed, accidents typically turn quite worse on I-35 simply because of speed. And in a moment, we'll discuss how speed and lack of driver's attention, how they are being contributing more to our fatality than serious injuries.
So that kind of, multi-year event, you don't think had any bearing on these numbers?
No,
Okay.
no. And quite a lot of, when we look at our maps, for instance, is spread out across McLennan County. And so roughly about half of the fatality and serious injury are happening inside the, in the center parts in the city of Waco, but remaining half of them happen in more rural, rural highways and such.
So you wouldn't say that construction has any real bearing?
In our case, no, although typically construction zones do represent serious additional risk.
Right.
And typically those risks are borne by the construction workers rather than the drivers. And so fortunately for I-35 4B period of construction, we, in some ways we have been fortunate that we have not had any major incident. Some of the work that we have been doing, I wanted to walk over this. So we have been internally at the NPO, we have been mapping and doing quite a bit of data analysis on what we're noticing in our McLennan County. So looking at this map, you can see that a lot of our injuries and so fatalities are the red dots, which are very small, but they're spread across the county. A lot of fender bender and non-property injuries happen more in city areas, but that's not necessarily our highest priority area in terms of fatalities or serious injury. A lot of it is happening because of speed. And so what we did was we also did some analysis of some things that changed. So let me go over one more thing, and then we'll talk about some of the causes. So one of the—
Was this calendar year 2022, like on that map, or was
Yes,
that January through December 2022? Okay,
Yes.
well, and that was a construction year, and yeah, there's not a lot on that 35 corridor.
2023 numbers are still not finalized because typically TxDOT does a data check on sometime by March or so, and when they will finalize what the 2023 numbers have been. Because in the data check, it turns out, so you take the police report and incident report and make sure that it correlates appropriately with what is being reported. And so that data check takes a bit of time. That's what TxDOT is going through. So we'll have the final numbers for 2023 sometime by March. So one of the items we noticed was, so as we are planning for transportation projects and incorporating safety and integrating them into it, that we need to be very clear about what are objective conditions of safety and what people think is safe. And it turns out that in many cases, what we think is safe is objectively quite unsafe. And so one of the classic examples is the crossing guards. Crossing guards gives us a sense of safety, but it's typically one of the worst areas for traffic accidents and fatalities and serious injuries. Another area where we think that areas that are sidewalks are a great example in which perceived and objective match perfectly. So everything there, because we perceive them to be safe, they are objectively safe. But areas where we notice some problem with the higher population density, for instance, has no correlation at all with what the safety conditions are. Similarly, street parking and higher intersection density, so typically areas where lots of cars are going, we often perceive them to be unsafe, but turns out that they're actually fairly safe for traffic fatalities and such. So there's a big gap between what we think is safe and what is objectively safe. And we want to make sure that that insight gets carried into our project design. Another important part that I wanted to bring to our attention, and this is your classic Valley Mills Drive. Next slide, please. What we call the STROADS, streets that function as neither streets nor roads. So they typically have relatively higher speed limit, but not so fast that they're not working at roads. But they also have lots of interconnections. So Valley Mills is a classic example of a road in which the traffic stops at every stop, but it is still a fairly higher speed road. And these represent some fairly high risk areas for us. So one of the things we are thinking is that how do we incorporate bike lane, sidewalk, crosswalk, traffic stop sign improvement, crossing guards, how do we use them, speed bumps and all of it, so that we can figure out how can we make these areas safer. In our analysis, what we notice is, next slide, please, that what is classified as failed to control speed was contributed to 1,144. That's roughly about a quarter of all of our serious incident fatalities that occurred had to do with failure to control the speed. And then the next item, big item, is the driver inattention, which is obviously a catch-all item. So we typically think of that as texting and driving that we actively discourage. But one of the things that what we are realizing is that it's easy for us to simply blame the drivers, or we can sometimes, and under the Safe Street for All program, we often say that we need to design our streets so that we can accommodate for drivers' errors. Well, both are problematic, because if drivers aren't paying attention, no matter what the street design is, it's going to help. But do we have plenty of room to improve our street designs? Absolutely, we do. But one of the things we are noticing is that the driver inattention, the typical response is that we want to tell people that don't drink and drive, or don't do drugs and drive, or don't text and drive, and don't do X, Y, Z. And turns out that over the last 3 years, driver inattention has actually gotten worse. And so it can't be, we can't conclude that, oh, we're not doing enough public messaging. A lot of it simply has to do with how we are existing on our streets. There's plenty of examples even in public health literature now. We are beginning to see that higher level of personal stress often results in a very combustible situation the moment we get behind wheels. And that's what we see in a lot of road rages. And in fact, there is quite a bit of psychological work that is doing that we're trying to, that is being done, that we're trying to incorporate into our planning process, about how road rage is often contagious. So it's not just that one person who cut you off that upset you. Quite often it results in somebody else getting upset, and before you know it, you have 4 or 5 cars which are all getting very upset behind the wheel. And so we want to make sure that some of these behaviors are actually understood and accounted for in our planning process. But there's one more item that I wanted to go over, and that's sort of how in future we would like to move forward. So if we really wanted to commit ourselves at 2050 targets for Vision Zero, the blue line represents a 5% annual decrease in fatality, and the right-hand side graph shows for the same thing for serious injury. The red line or the orange line is a 10% reduction each year. If we maintain that level of reduction, that's when we can reasonably expect that by 2050, we can, hypothetically at least, reduce fatalities to close to 2 in McLennan County and serious injuries to about just over 15. And ideally, that's the kind of target we would love to set for ourselves so that we can move toward it. And even if we don't succeed fully, those are much better targets than some of the targets that we're adopting right now. So next slide, please. So some of the work that we have already been doing at the February meeting, we are going to be presenting to you how we are incorporating safety into the MTP call for proposal and project selection criteria, and integrating it thoroughly in the consideration of every project we do. But at the same time, right now we are developing the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. We also received the funding of $1.5 million to do planning and demonstration project. And so what we are doing is that with all of this, our expectation is that within the next 3 to 4 years, we would begin to see some significant decline. And that, at least that's what we're operating. That's a target with which we are operating, and we'll be able to demonstrate whether it is being successful or not. So let's move to the next slide. Related to this is also public transportation safety targets. And I do want to highlight something really important here. So under the FAST Act, we have to similarly adopt some safety targets for fatality and serious injuries for public transportation as well. And we set these performance measures again, similarly in terms of fatality, serious injury, number of safety events, and number of mechanical failures. And we do this on an annual basis. So these are the targets. Next slide, please. These are the targets that Waco Transit presented. It was adopted by City of Waco. I want you to pay very close attention to this, that you should look at the total number of baseline fatality. It's 0. And our target is also 0. So in many ways, if we were serious about Vision 0, we wanted to get our fatalities to be 0. We have already achieved that Vision 0 objective in our public transportation system. And compare that to the acceptable number of deaths that we're taking at roughly about 24. And the reason why this is important is that if we were serious about safety, we would also be considering how public transit and bike, pedestrian, and other alternatives also help us mitigate some of these roadway conditions that we have. Next slide. So what we are requesting you to do is give us the direction to hold the public informational meetings, which we expect to start on January 22nd, and public comment period will begin till January 31st. And we will do a public meeting on 5:30 p.m. on January 22nd at 401 Franklin. And the Technical Advisory Committee will consider these targets at its February 1 meeting, make its recommendation, and then we'll bring it for your consideration to adopt as the target for the next year.
Any discussion or questions, observations on Mr. requested directed action here on our targets? All those in favor of allowing the MPO staff to move forward with this plan for public participation, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. We have unanimous direction there. And then update and discussion from staff regarding the 2050 MTP development process.
The quickest update I have is MTP steering committee has been meeting and considering the call for proposal framework and the evaluation criteria. At the last meeting, we presented a very rough rubric of what we are considering. And based on that input, as well as some preliminary discussion we have had, what we are planning to do is complete a fairly clean draft of the proposal to the MTP steering committee in early February. And then we would like to bring it to you at the February meeting for your consideration. We'll present what it is that we are requesting you to do for your consideration. At the March meeting, we are expecting you to give us, so at the February, you'll direct us. If anything you don't like about it, you'll tell us and we will move, change it. But at the March meeting, based on those changes, we will bring for your consideration to adopt a new call for proposal and the project evaluation criteria for the MTP process. One of the important things that we have that has come out in our MTP steering committee meetings is that one of the things that we want to do is make sure that a lot of conversations that often do happen already between TxDOT district as well as the respective cities, that there is a formal structure to it so that it's not necessarily because people change, staff changes over time. It's important that we have some of these done in a formal way. And so with this MTP, what we're expecting to do is also develop some sort of tracking system so that we know how the projects evolve over time. And so at the next meeting, you will have a full presentation on the draft of what this call for proposal is going to look like.
Any questions or concerns about this development process? Let's move on to update discussion from staff regarding grant efforts.
So the first one is the FY 2022 planning grant under which we are developing the comprehensive safety action plan now. We are expecting to complete it by May of 2024. Several of you have received emails for scheduling the first meeting with the consultants to go over some of the preliminary list of projects, problems, and how we might want to go forward. At the March meeting, we will have a completed list of projects that we will be developing and including in the comprehensive safety action plan. FY 2023 SS4A grant, we received 1.2 million in federal funding. And for that one, we have 6 locations for projects in Waco, Hewitt, Belmead. That grant has not been executed yet, but we expect to get working on that very soon. The implementation grants for FY 2024 that we are expecting all the cities to do, there is a bit of a kink in that process, which is that we were expecting the deadline for FY 2024 SS4A to be after May, But it turns out that they, as in Federal Higher Administration, intends to open up this round of funding in February. If they open in February, then most likely they will have a closing date of sometime in March. If that were to be the case, then we're going to reach out to you all again and see if we can apply for another demonstration project. That way we can in fact have at least access to some funding, based on what we find out. And so that's the update on that one. For FY 2023 RAISE grant, we are about to, we have been doing quite a bit of preparation work in the background, and some of you will start hearing from us very soon. One of the important things that I wanted to mention, and as we move forward, we will have more to present on this, that for the smart network corridor idea from Taylor Street, from I-35 through Franklin to Spur 298 to US 84 all the way to Ritchie Road. The way we are setting these targets are that we want the smart network corridor to operate largely to improve what we understand why cities exist or do well in the first place. And which the most important criteria we're looking at is the overall interaction cost. And what interaction basically means is that every time we use transportation network of any sort, we use it to engage in some form of interaction, whether it is going to work in the morning, whether it's going to school or going to grocery store or going for shopping or going for recreational activities. Each of these trips are nothing but one set of economic interaction that we're engaged in. And cities that typically do better are cities where economic interaction costs are the lowest. And so what we want to do is make sure that with this project, we have a strategy to move forward so that we can reduce the overall interaction costs. And so the idea behind interaction cost is that we're not just thinking about the congestion or amount of time it takes, but also the overall cost of interaction for an individual citizen itself. And so that's sort of like the broad objective that we have set for this project that you'll begin to see. This will take some time. This project will last probably close to 3 years from now than sooner. And the last item that we have not heard is that we applied for a SMART grant for FY 2023. Once we hear about it, we'll bring an update.
Okay. Any questions, concerns, comments?
Just want to give you a very quick update for the SS4A planning demonstration project. Those are the locations that we have in mind that we will be working on very, very soon. Most of these project locations are on TxDOT right of way. And so what we will be doing is first bringing in a consultant to do some design work and then bring in another consultant to actually do the project management on this.
Well, let's move on to update discussion from staff regarding the redesignation of the MPO.
The only update I have is that the supporting resolutions are in the making with the city of Waco, McLennan County, and the city of Hewitt. Once we have these supporting resolutions, we'll send it forward to TPMP, and we will then expect them to revise the planning agreement, which will be signed and executed in the month of September of this year.
Thank you much. Any questions? All right. Update and discussion from the TAC. Is it Amy or Zane?
Well, thank you. Most of the items that we discussed in our TAC meeting a week or two ago have already been discussed here in front of you all regarding these UTP, the NTP, and these other strict safe streets for all. So there's nothing new than what you already heard. So, thank you.
Any questions or comments on that? Great committee update there. All right, now we move on to why we're all here, honestly. Update and discussion from the Texas Department of Transportation regarding significant highway construction. Clayton, thanks so much.
All right. We'll start with Spring Valley. Biggest thing to note on this project since we last met is we did make a traffic switch on the north end of that job. So from Old Temple up to Sun Valley, we're running on new pavement, starting removals and drainage on that west half of the roadway. And then on the south end from Old Temple back to Hewitt Drive, we have completed all drainage installation in the process of wrapping up our subgrade work. If we catch a break in the weather, you should see some seal coat going down the end of this month with the anticipation of paving into February and getting traffic switched on that south end as well. Still looking towards that fall of 2024 completion. Our IH-35 resurfacing project, this job, all paving is complete. Really the only items to note is we do have some metal beam guard fence upgrades still coming. And then we'll actually be installing our delineation at the 4th, 5th Street U-turn. They're the north to south U-turn actually tomorrow. So you'll see that work going on tomorrow afternoon. Our University Park's widening, again, this is from LaSalle to Loop 340. The bulk of the work is continuing subgrade widening on the south half of the roadway. Looking to start paving operations this spring into the summer. We're continuing to work on the first half of the bridge there at Primrose Creek. I expect to have it open up this summer, and kind of as paving is complete, the remainder of the project will be completing the second half of that structure, looking to complete the entire job at the end of the calendar year. All the mall, if you want to go and just walk through the pictures. I apologize, these are a little outdated. It's been tough to get photos with the weather here lately, but starting at the Bagby intersection, here traffic turning in final configuration, there's a little bit of signal work to do here to swap over to the new signals. You'll see that likely happen in the March timeframe. Moving to the west, here frontage roads are complete. We've actually started some main lane paving operations with our final surface, all permanent barriers in place, and working to get traffic up on these new main lanes sometime in February. Here, the 2 bridges over Beverly, since this photo was taken, both structures have been poured, rail is complete, and actually started paving from this bridge going towards 84 in the last couple of weeks. So that'll continue as we catch breaks in the weather here over the next few weeks. Moving to the west, again, this is the area where we've got permanent surface down on the main lanes. Frontage road work is basically complete, a little bit of riprap work, getting vegetation in place, that kind of thing in this area. Again, both of these structures are now complete. As of last week, all bridges on the project have been poured, working on getting rail in place on that last bridge. Again, anticipating getting traffic up and over those main lanes in February. Moving towards 84, and rails in place at the center of the main lanes, have our subsurface paving down and working on getting that final surface down. Open it up, any questions?
Clayton, thank you. When you were talking about the 4th and 5th Street U-turn, that means that there'll be railing there, so this can't happen.
It won't be actual railing, but it'll be what we call ground mounted delineation. We recently did something similar on Hewitt Drive, but it's almost like a high density rubber curb with the candlestick delineators on it. So it'll run from roughly the curb there at the U-turn past 6th Street.
And the license?
In process.
Listen.
That is the most wild rides right now, is coming under that U-turn, people coming out.
So by the end of the day tomorrow, it'll be very, very different.
Okay, that's great. Thank you all for. And then, so it sounds like mall to mall, do you have an estimate for when that is kind of wrapped up with a bow on it?
So looking at getting traffic switched, like I said, to the main lanes in February, you're looking at probably roughly a 2 to 3 month time period after that to kind of tie up the loose ends at that point. So late spring, should be wrapped up over there.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And any work group updates?
Yeah, so we had our connected automated vehicle work group meet yesterday, and one of the things we are working on is to develop a white paper, which again we'll bring for your consideration, for where we identify the gaps in the charging infrastructure as well as the approach we want to take. One of the updates we have is that charging fueling infrastructure grant program was announced a few days ago, and we did not receive any funding in Central Texas. Actually, the only areas that received any funding in this grant were Metroplex, that received most of the funding, and a tiny little bit was given to El Paso area. Nobody else received any other funding whatsoever. And so we had quite a bit of discussion on this yesterday, and we were trying to figure out how do we position ourselves so that we can make charging infrastructure, we can make ourselves a little more competitive with that. So that's what our goal is with the white paper, and we'll present to you, which will then become official position of the MPO on the charging infrastructure in the area, so that we can start using that document to direct not only the CFI applications, but also the next rounds of funding under the NEVI program. Next meeting for connected automated vehicle is April 17th. If there is anybody that you think should be attending this meeting, please send them that way. We will have our next bike and pedestrian work group meeting on February 21st.
Any questions on our work groups? We'll move on to our MPO monthly report and an update on the local fund, which I don't know if will include a passing of the plate or not.
Well, most of you have probably received a letter from me requesting you to contribute to the local fund. So please do that, because that's one is exactly why we have been able to apply for all these fundings and have been quite successful at it. Without that local fund, none of that would have happened. The other very exciting update we have is several of you know Daniela Gaiwas. She had a baby, and so she is the most latest member of the MP Hub.
That's going to really help bring the average age down.
Yes, exactly.
All right, well, thank you for that. The next MPO policy board meeting is scheduled for Thursday, February 15th, 2024 at 1:30. If any of you have issues with the 1:30 start time, it seems to work pretty well here today, but feel free to email me or Dr. Kumar on that. Any agenda items for next meeting that anyone would like to propose? All right, we provide an opportunity at the end here for the public to address the MPO policy board on any item of MPO business not identified in this agenda. We will open the meeting, the hearing of visitors here at 2:38. Do we have any registered speakers or anyone else who would like to speak? We will also close the hearing of visitors at 2:38, and with no further business, we will adjourn the meeting at the same time, 2:38. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your outstanding.